Lenora James lived far from the busy world, on a quiet farm just outside a small southern town. Her house was old but strong, built from wood and stone, with a wide porch and a tin roof that sang in the rain. The land stretched for miles, filled with tall grass, a few goats, and rows of vegetables she planted by hand. She lived alone, and most people didn't know much about her to the townspeople. She was just an old black woman who came to the market every 2 weeks. She bought flour, coffee, and feed for her animals, always paid in cash, and spoke politely but briefly. No one knew where she came from, and no one asked. Children called her Miss Lenora when they saw her in town. She always wore the same white hat, a long coat, and heavy boots. Even in summer, she walked like a soldier. Straight and steady, some whispered she had a hard past. Maybe a runaway, maybe a widow, but no one knew the truth. Lenora never talked about her younger days. What no one guessed was that Lenora had once been someone very different, not just a farmer, but a sniper. A soldier, a warrior, trained in silence. Years ago, she had worn a uniform and carried a rifle instead of a rake. She had served her country in places most people had never heard of. She had climbed mountains, crawled through jungles, and waited for hours in the shadows. She had saved lives and taken lives too. She was given a name by her unit, Whisper Wind, because her bullets came like a breeze and left like ghosts. But war changes people, and Lenora had seen enough. One day, after her final mission, she packed her bag, left the base, and never looked back. She bought the land with her savings, far from cities and noise. She chose peace, nature, and hard work. She built her fence, planted her crops, and cared for her animals like family. She woke before the sun, boiled her coffee, and worked till her hands were tired. At night, she sat on her porch, watching the stars, listening to the wind. She spoke to no one unless she had to, but she was not lonely. She found peace in silence and strength in the simple life. But peace doesn't last forever. Lately, she had noticed things were off. One morning, she saw tire tracks near the back gate, deep ones, too fresh. She didn't own a car, and no one had any reason to be on her land. Later that day, she found a candy wrapper near the barn, something she never bought. The fence near the chicken coop had a new bandage if someone had leaned on it. Goats were restless, barking at the trees at night. Even the wind felt wrong. Lenora didn't panic. She didn't call the sheriff or the neighbors. Instead, she walked the land with sharp eyes. She measured footprints, checked shadows, watched the birds. Something or someone was watching her, and she knew it. She opened an old chest in her room. Inside was a folded military uniform, some medals, and a black case. She ran her hand over the case. Feeling its weight, its power, she opened it, and there it was, her rifle, clean and quiet, waiting like an old friend. She hadn't fired it in years, but her hands remembered the grip, the trigger, the breath control. She closed the case and placed it near her bed. That night, she didn't sleep much. She lit a single candle, boiled tea, and sat by the window. Her eyes watched the darkness like a hawk. Calm and still, she wasn't scared, she was ready. The farm looked peaceful in the moonlight. But deep in the woods, beyond the trees, trouble was coming. A group of men had marked her farm as their next hit. They didn't know who she was. They saw her as weak, alone, and easy to rob. But they were wrong, very wrong, because Lenora James was not just an old woman. She was the storm waiting in silence, and if they crossed her line, they would learn why soldiers once called her Whisper Wind. Asterisk. For weeks, Lenora had sensed the shift in the wind. The way the crows moved, the feeling of eyes she could not see. She knew the land like she knew her own breath. Every path, every tree, every dip in the soil. So when something changed, she noticed right away. It started small. One of her goats refused to graze near the fence line. Then the barn cat, a stray she had fed for years, refused to go out at night. Nature was whispering to her, and Lenora listened. On a cool evening just before sunset, she walked her property with slow, steady steps. She bent down at the far corner of the field and touched the ground. There were new tire marks, deep grooves that didn't belong to her, beside them. A crushed beer can glinted in the grass. She picked it up, turned it in her hand, and smelled it fresh. Someone had been here within the last day. Her farm was no longer invisible at the edge of her land. She found cigarette butts near a cluster of trees. She crouched, her fingers brushing the ashes. Still warm from the sun, she looked up and scanned the tree line, her eyes narrowing out there beyond her fence. With someone who thought they were unseen, Lenora felt her old instincts rise like smoke. She had once been trained to track men through jungles and cities alike. The prints, the rappers, the butts, they told her a story. This was not a hunter or a lost traveler. This was a group, watching her, testing her defenses, in town. The talk had been different lately, too, when she went for supplies. She heard whispers about break-ins on rural farms. Tools stolen, animals taken, even a whole truck missing. People said it was a gang from the city, young men with nothing to lose. The sheriff warned folks to lock their doors. But out here, help came slow. Lenora said nothing. But she remembered every word. She had been in places where law came too late. She had survived because she relied on herself. Not promises. That night, she prepared, in the barn. She hung up lanterns, but left them unlit. She didn't want to make herself a target. She rigged old tin cans and fishing line across the paths. If someone moved in the dark, she would hear it before she saw it. She scattered dried beans on the porch steps, a sound trap, only she would notice from a high beam in the barn. She unrolled an old canvas bundle. Inside was her field kit. A ghost from her past, binoculars, a knife, a small first aid pack, and a notebook. She flipped through the notebook blank pages now. Waiting to be filled again, she wrote down times, patterns. In places she had found tracks, she was building a picture of her enemy before she even saw their faces. At midnight, the sky was black, no moon. Only the silver light of stars. Lenora sat by her window with her tea. The rifle case beside her still closed. She did not rush to open it. She hoped she wouldn't have to. But she knew better than to hope too hard in the distance. A sound of twig snapping made her eyes flick toward the trees. Another sound soft, like a foot on dry grass. She set down her cup and reached for the binoculars. She scanned the edge of the field. Slow and steady, her breath calm. At first, nothing. Just darkness and leaves moving in the breeze. Then a flicker, the shine of metal, the glow of a cigarette, two shapes. Crouched low near the fence, thinking themselves hidden. She didn't move, she didn't shout. She simply watched as they leaned over her fence, pointing at the barn. One man gestured like he was measuring something. The other laughed quietly. They were scouting. Not stealing yet, she'll let them go. Her eyes tracking every step back to the woods. They left the way they came. But she had their faces now burned into her memory. The next morning, the farm looked the same, but it wasn't. Lenora walked to the fence and touched the spot where their hands had been. The wood was warm in the rising sun. But she felt the cold edge of danger. She knew they would be back, and next time they wouldn't be empty-handed. She stood straight, looking at the horizon. The quiet air heavy with meaning. The farm was no longer just a home, it was a line she would defend. Her fingers brushed the scar on her wrist, a memory from another fight long ago. "Not again," she whispered, her voice low but steady. The goats bleated softly behind her. Sensing her tension, she turned toward the house, her mind already moving faster than her steps. The traps were set. The plan was forming. And somewhere out there, the men who thought she was an easy target had no idea they had just awakened the whisper wind. Lenora didn't sleep that night. Her body sat still. But her mind wandered far back to places most people never dream of. Places where dirt roads turned red with dust and silence could save your life. She sat on the edge of her bed as the wind rustled the curtains in the quiet of her old farmhouse. She heard sounds only she could remember, the hum of helicopters, the sharp snap of gunfire, the steady rhythm of her own breath behind a scope. Years ago, she was not just Lenora James, the farmer. She had worn a uniform with pride, a young black woman who didn't care what the world expected of her. She had joined the army when she was barely 20. No one believed she would make it through sniper school, but she did. She didn't argue. She just outshot everyone else. The instructors called her Whisper Wind because no one ever heard her coming. Her bullets spoke louder than words. She had served in places where the ground burned hot and fear hung thick in the air. She had lain still for hours under the sun, watching, waiting, protecting her unit from afar, picking off enemies before they even saw her face. She never smiled when she pulled the trigger, just breathed. Aim and finished her job. Her hands had saved lives. But they had taken lives too, and those faces, even the bad ones, sometimes came back in dreams after her last tour. Something inside her broke quietly. She didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't ask for help. She just left, like a shadow. Bought a quiet piece of land and disappeared from the world. But she never threw anything away, not her uniform, not her medals, and not her rifle. She kept them locked up in the old barn. Not because she wanted to use them again, but because she respected what they meant. A piece of her life she couldn't erase. Now, as the signs of danger grew louder, that part of her stirred again. The soldier inside her was waking up, not angry, but aware. She walked to the barn at sunrise. Her boots heavy on the soil. Inside, the old place smelled like hay and metal. She moved to the far corner behind wooden crates and knelt down. Her fingers found the hidden latch in the floorboards. She pulled up the cover and reached into the darkness. Out came a long black case, old but clean. She placed it on the workbench and slowly unlatched it. Inside, nestled in foam, was her M40 sniper rifle. The barrel still shone. The scope dust-free. She touched it gently, like greeting an old friend who never betrayed her. Beside it lay a small box of hand-loaded bullets carefully made years ago, each one marked with a date, a memory. She picked one up, turned it in her hand, and remembered the mission it was built for. She placed it back, closed the box, and looked at the weapon for a long time. She didn't want to kill again. She hoped she wouldn't have to, but she wasn't naive. The men she saw in the dark weren't lost. They weren't teenagers playing games. They were calculating, organized, and dangerous. They had picked her farm, thinking she was weak and alone. They had no idea she had once taken down enemies through sandstorms and jungle leaves. That afternoon, she went back to town, but not to talk. She bought batteries, canned food, extra rope, and gloves. She stopped by the hardware store and picked up nails, wire, and a new shovel. The man behind the counter gave her a curious look, but she only smiled and nodded. When she returned, she worked like a ghost. Moving quietly across her land, she dug shallow holes and placed old steel bear traps she had kept stored in the barn. She restrung fences with thin wires almost invisible in the dark. She sharpened her tools, oiled her rifle, and mapped the land on paper. She circled key spots: the hay shed, the water tank, the porch, the high ground near the trees. Night came again, but this time she felt no fear, only focus. She sat on her porch, wrapped in a blanket, sipping her tea. The stars above twinkled as if watching her from a great height. The wind blew gently across the field, but she didn't flinch. Every breath she took was steady, controlled. She could feel the earth breathing beneath her boots. It was her land, her rules, and in that darkness, with the rifle across her lap and the ghosts of her past standing beside her, Lenora made a quiet promise: if they came again, they would not be met with fear. They would not find a helpless woman. They would meet the whisper-winged one last time. Asterisk, the air was thick with silence that night. No crickets, no owls. Not even the wind dared to move through the trees. Lenora James sat in her rocking chair, still as stone. Her eyes, sharp as ever, stared through the darkness. Beside her lay her old rifle, oiled and ready. She wasn't hunting, she was waiting. Waiting for a mistake. The traps were set. The wire across the fence. The broken glass behind the shed. The dried beans on the porch steps. Every sound had meaning. Every shadow told a story. She wasn't just guarding a farm, she was commanding a battlefield. And in her mind, the past and present had become one. At 1:43 a.m., it began a low rumble of an engine down the dirt road. No headlights, no music, just the hum of tired wheels on gravel. Lenora leaned forward slightly, her hand tightening on her scope. The truck stopped just out of view, behind the tree line. Then, she heard boots crunching leaves, multiple footsteps, slow and confident. 4 men crept forward under the cover of trees. Dressed in dark clothes, faces hidden behind scarves. They carried crowbars, flashlights, and knives. They laughed quietly, sure of themselves. One whispered, "Old lady's probably asleep." "This'll be easy," Lenora almost smiled. They still had no idea who they were dealing with. They reached the outer fence, stepped over it with care. One man led the group, pointing to the barn. Another circled toward the chicken coop. They moved like wolves in a pack, silent, spreading out. But Lenora had already marked each of their paths. She had memorized the land like a map burned into her mind. Then it happened. Clink. The second man had tripped her fishing line trap. 3 tin cans rattled loudly, breaking the silence like gunshots. The men froze, their heads whipping around. What was that? One hissed before anyone could answer. A red laser dot appeared on the ground between them. Then another, just inches from one man's boot. Lenora was watching from her rooftop position, scope steady. She let them feel her presence before they ever saw her. "Who the hell?" one started to say. Crack! A bullet struck a post behind him. Not hitting flesh, but close enough to split the wood. He fell backward, screaming, "We're being shot at." The others scrambled, unsure of where the shot came from. The leader tried to pull his flashlight, but Lenora shattered it with her second shot. Glass flew, panic spread. "Go! Go! Back to the truck!" Someone shouted, but the truck wouldn't start. While they were sneaking around, Lenora had taken her wire cutters and sliced through the ignition wires. They were trapped in the dark, on her land, under her rules. And she wasn't chasing them, she was hurting them. Each bullet struck near their feet, in front of their hands, against trees and fences. Not to kill but to control. She wanted them to feel hunted. One man ran toward the barn and slipped on a patch of oil she had poured earlier. He crashed to the ground, twisting his leg, groaning in pain. A flashlight beam hit him, but not from his crew. Lenora turned it on just enough to reveal his face. He looked up, eyes wide, and saw her for the first time, a woman in a long coat, calm, holding a rifle like it belonged there. "Go home," she said, her voice low but firm. "Tell them not to come back." The others grabbed the injured man and ran for the woods. They left their tools, their truck, and their pride behind. Lenora didn't follow. She stood on the porch once more, watching the trees swallow them up. Her heart beat steady, her breath calm. The attack was over, but the war might not be. She spent the rest of the night gathering their things, crowbars, Gloves, a half-burned cigarette with a lipstick stain. Evidence, fingerprints, faces burned into memory. She cleaned her rifle, wiped the prints, stored it back in the barn, then, as dawn touched the sky with soft pink light, she brewed a fresh cup of tea. The goats wandered back out, calm once again. Birds began to sing as if nothing had happened. But something had. Lines had been crossed. She had given them a warning, a lesson, a chance to walk away. Whether they took it or not would be seen soon enough. Lenora wasn't scared. She had faced worse in places far from home. But she was ready, and now the gang knew. This was no ordinary farm, and the woman who lived here was no victim. She was the whisper wind, and this was only her first strike. The sun rose slowly the next morning, golden light pouring over the fields like honey. To most eyes, the farm looked peaceful, just an old house. A small barn, an open land, but something had shifted beneath the surface. The soil still held the prints of running boots. The wind still carried the scent of sweat and fear. And inside the farmhouse, Lenora James sat at her kitchen table. Cleaning her hands with a cloth, the table held items left behind: 2 crowbars, a torn glove, and a cheap phone with a cracked screen. She turned the phone over, pressed the power button. It buzzed weakly to life, showing a wallpaper photo of a man posing with a dirt bike. She scrolled through the messages, her fingers steady. Group chats filled the screen, laughing emojis. Photos of stolen goods. One message read, "Old lady place tonight." Should be light work. Lenora didn't frown, didn't smile. She just whispered. Not light enough, but she knew this wasn't over. She had scared them. Yes, but fear can grow into anger. And angry men make dangerous choices. That afternoon, far across the city, in a cramped apartment, the gang leader threw a bottle at the wall. His name was Rhys, reckless, loud when he won, and violent when he lost. His pride was bleeding from the failure, and his wallet was still empty. "How the hell did 4 of you lose to one old woman?" he yelled, pacing the floor. "She's not normal," one of the others muttered. "She was waiting on us." Like she knew everything. Rhys's eyes narrowed. Well, now we go back with more. That night, 6 men climbed into a van, carrying more than just tools. They brought shotguns, flashlights, and gasoline. This time, they didn't want to rob her. They wanted to scare her, punish her, burn the memory of her farm off the map. They laughed as they drove down the empty country road. But the laughter died when they saw their old truck still parked near the woods where they had left it. Doors open, engine useless, tires slashed. A single paper note sat under the windshield wiper. It read, "Round 2. I'm still here." Rhys crumpled the note in his fist. Face red with rage. "Light it up," he growled. "Let's make her run." But Lenora was not running. She was high in the barn's loft, covered in burlap. Her rifle aimed through a crack in the boards. She watched them move like shadows, louder this time, cockier. They didn't notice the small red dots she had painted on the dirt earlier that day. Pressure points, just wide enough for a boot to step on. As one man crossed the line, snap, a loud pop from underfoot. The flare trap exploded upward, lighting the sky with red smoke and sparks. The men ducked, coughing, yelling, "What the?" Then a voice came from nowhere, calm, slow, dangerous. "You think I can't see you?" They froze, eyes wide. "You brought fire to my door." The voice continued. "Now you'll feel the heat." Rhys fired his shotgun into the dark, but hit only a tree. The sound echoed through the field. But no one replied. Then crack a shot rang out, and a flashlight exploded in one man's hand. Screams followed, panic rising. Lenora moved like wind across the barn loft. Her boots silent, her aim exact. She didn't shoot to kill, not yet, but every bullet landed inches from knees. Shoulders, fingers. She was sending a message. You are not in control here. Reese tried to run back to the van but found it locked. The tires had been drained, the keys gone. Another man stumbled into a ditch and landed in mud. Juan dropped his gun and ran blindly into a barbed wire fence, crying out in pain. The gang broke, scattered like mice, crawling into the woods. Some limped, some crawled, all terrified. They didn't look back. They didn't speak. Even Reese was silent now, his hands shaking as he disappeared into the trees. And Lenora didn't follow. She stood on her rooftop. Watching through her scope, she waited until the land was still again. Then she climbed down, calm as ever. Later, under the moonlight, she collected more evidence, more phones. A shotgun, a silver chain. She placed them all in a box marked Sheriff. She would deliver it in the morning. The law might not come fast, but she could give them a full case. Wrapped and ready, by dawn, her farm was quiet again. But the message had spread across whispers. Across back alleys and dirt roads, don't go near that farm. Don't touch that woman, because if you do, you won't come back the same. They had tried to bring war to her home. But they forgot she had already survived one. And this time, she wasn't fighting for orders. She was fighting for her land, for her peace. And she had no intention of losing, by morning. The sun rose slow and golden over the hills, but Lenora was already up. Dressed in clean clothes, her boots polished. She walked calmly to her old pickup truck. A box tucked under one arm, inside the box, 2 phones. A shotgun, a crowbar, a silver chain, and printed photos from her trail camera. Clear faces, clear hands, holding weapons. Clear evidence. She didn't drive fast, she never did, but every mile into town felt like a signal. Today, the sheriff would finally listen. Sheriff Clay Thompson was sipping his 3rd cup of coffee when she walked through the station door. He looked up, surprised. "Miss Lenora," he said, standing quickly. "Everything all right?" She placed the box on the front counter without a word. He opened the lid, and his eyes widened. "What is this?" he asked, reaching for the phones. Lenora's voice was calm. "Almost cold proof," she said, "of who's been robbing these farms. Including mine." He pulled out one of the phones and turned it on. A video clip played a man laughing, bragging about hitting that old lady's land. Another clip showed the truck speeding down a country road. Lenora crossed her arms. Waiting, the sheriff watched, his brows furrowed. He'd heard rumors, farmers talking in low voices. Frightened eyes, missing tools. But this was different. He leaned back in his chair, the wheels creaking beneath him. "Where'd you get all this?" "From them," she said plainly, "after they tried to burn down my barn." He looked up, startled. "They came back." "With more," she nodded. 6 this time. Left with fewer working legs than they came in with, Clay didn't smile. But a flicker of respect lit in his eyes. He reached for the shotgun in the box and turned it over in his hands. "You kept them alive." "They're young," she said. "Stupid, but alive." "I don't shoot to kill unless I must." Clay stood and motioned her into his office. She followed, slow and steady, behind closed doors. She told him everything what she saw. What they left behind, the traps she'd built. And finally, after a long silence, she pulled out one last item, her military ID. Long expired, but still sharp with her photo. He took it gently, read the name, his jaw tightening. "You were with the 1st Recon out of Fort Bragg," he said quietly. "Sniper unit," she replied. "2 tours, I thought you looked familiar," he muttered. "Your whisper wind." The room fell quiet. He had heard the stories about a sniper who could take out a target through mist and jungle from a mile away. They said she once saved an entire convoy by taking out 5 ambushers in 30 seconds. He had thought it was just legend. Now she was sitting in his office. in denim and dust, offering him a box of criminals. "I'll take this to the DA," Clay said finally. "They'll press charges. Hard ones," good Lenora said, standing. "But don't come asking for war stories," he nodded. "You have my word." By noon, word began to spread through town. Someone had seen her walk into the station. Box in hand, another saw her drive back out. Calm as ever, the local cafe buzzed with talk. She caught them. All of them. Used to be military, they say. Sniper, like in the movies. People who once smiled politely but didn't know her name now looked twice. The old veterans at the barber shop tipped their hats with more weight. One mother told her daughter, "That woman right there, she's a hero." Lenora didn't care about any of it. She hadn't done it for praise. She had done it because no one else was going to protect her land. And because she was tired of waiting for the world to remember she was still here that evening, Clay drove out to her farm. He stepped out, no sirens, no backup, just a brown bag in his hand. "Peach cobbler," he said, from the diner. "For your help," Lenora raised an eyebrow, but took it. "You come for a report?" "No," he said, looking around, "just wanted to say." "We should have listened sooner." She nodded once. "Now you know." He looked out across her land quiet. "Green, strong, you need backup. You call, I won't," she said. "But thank you." He smiled faintly and turned to leave. As his truck rolled away, Lenora sat on her porch once more. The cobbler warm in her hands, the wind gentle against her face. The law had finally caught up, but Lenora had already moved on. To her, justice wasn't about headlines or handcuffs. It was about peace, and sometimes, peace had to be protected by a steady hand and an old rifle. It started with a single photo. The sheriff's office released it to the local news, a grainy shot from Lenora's trail camera. It showed 3 young men, dressed in black, caught mid-step with weapons in their hands. The article underneath simply said, "Attempted farm raid, foiled evidence." Collected by retired veteran, they didn't mention her name. Not at first, but small towns don't keep secrets long. By the end of the day, everyone knew who the retired veteran was. Lenora James, the quiet woman on the edge of town. The one with goats, old boots, and a stare sharp as glass, at the cafe. People leaned over tables whispering. She fought them off herself, with a sniper rifle. At her age, she was military, some kind of elite. She didn't even call for help until it was over. By the second day, it wasn't just the town talking. A local blogger shared the story with the title, "Don't Rob Grand Mouche, Might Be a Sniper." It went viral within hours. National news picked it up by evening. Cable channels aired quick segments. Hero Granny defends her land. She's 67. A widow and a war legend. Sniper Grandma sends thugs running. Lenora didn't own a TV. But people started showing up. Reporters with big cameras waited at the edge of her gate. Some called her brave. Others called her dangerous. Most just wanted a soundbite. "Ma'am, can you tell us what happened that night? Do you have a message for criminals watching this? Would you do it again?" Lenora said nothing. She stayed on her porch. Quiet and calm, she fed her goats, watered her garden, and waved only when she felt like it. The attention didn't bother her, but it didn't interest her either. She had seen too much of the world to be impressed by flashing lights and fast words. But something unexpected happened. Real people started coming, not to gawk, but to learn. First, it was one young woman from town, maybe 22. She came alone, holding pepper spray in her hand. She asked shyly, "Can you teach me how to protect myself?" Lenora looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "No rifles," she said. "But I can teach you how to listen." Within a week, there were 4 more girls, mothers, a retired teacher, even a quiet teenage boy. They didn't want violence. They wanted confidence, awareness, strength. Lenora showed them how to walk steady, How to tie warning bells on fences. How to read footprints. How to know when something was off. She didn't talk about her past, only about what mattered now. One day, a little girl from the neighborhood came to her gate with a folded note. She handed it through the bars and ran away. Lenora opened it slowly, inside, in big, careful letters. It said, "Thank you for protecting us. No name. No address, just those 7 words. Lenora stared at the note for a long time, then tucked it into the frame of an old picture on her wall. It sat beside a black and white photo of her unit, all young faces, all in uniform. She hadn't looked at that photo in years. Meanwhile, the gang that had attacked her farm was still facing charges. 3 pled guilty, 2 ran, and 1 gave up names of others. The sheriff's office credited Lenora with the evidence that cracked the case. Reporters begged her to speak publicly. A TV producer even offered her money for a Sniper Grandma documentary. She refused it all. She wasn't a brand. She was a woman who stood her ground. She didn't want to be remembered for shooting. She wanted to be remembered for surviving, for planting seeds, for keeping the wolves out of the gate. At night, she sat on her porch again, as she always had, only now, she wasn't quite alone. The wind carried voices, laughter from the neighbors, footsteps of someone checking their fence. The town was watching out now, because she had reminded them how. A girl from the self-defense group brought her fresh cornbread one evening as she handed it over. She said, "You made us feel like we can stand up to Lenora," didn't reply right away. She looked out at the horizon and finally said, "You always could. You just needed to remember," and somewhere beyond the town lines, the rest of the world kept buzzing with her story. But to Lenora, the only headlines that mattered were the ones she wrote in the soil with her own hands. Row by row, seed by seed, she was still here. And that, in the end, was enough. Autumn came slowly to Lenora James's farm. The leaves turned golden, the wind grew cooler, and the goats grew thick coats for winter. Morning mist hugged the grass like a blanket, and the sky above glowed soft and silver. Peace had returned, but it was not the same as before. It was quieter, deeper, earned, not the kind of peace you find. The kind you fight for and protect. Lenora walked the land with steady steps, just like she always had. But now, the footsteps of others sometimes followed her. Children from the town visited on weekends, bringing apples for the goats and questions for her. They asked about farming, animals, and how to tie rope knots she'd learned long ago. Lenora answered the ones worth answering, and smiled quietly at the rest. Her porch had a new chair now. A gift from the local woodworker, carved into the top rail were the words, "Still standing." She didn't say thank you when he brought it. She just nodded, sat down, and rocked in it like it had always been there. The town had changed too. People locked their gates now, watched their roads, helped their neighbors more. It wasn't fear, it was awareness. They had remembered something Lenora had never forgotten. You don't wait for someone else to protect your home. You become that someone. The sheriff still visited every now and then, sometimes with pie, sometimes with news. The gang that had attacked her farm had gone to trial. Most were behind bars now. Others disappeared from the county altogether. But Lenora didn't care much for the outcome. Justice was never her goal, peace was. And peace wasn't something a courtroom could give her. One day, Clay brought her a plaque, polished wood. Official seal. Her name etched in bold, for courage, service, and protection of the community. He held it out. Proud, she looked at it for a long moment, then handed it back. "Put it in the sheriff's office," she said. "I already know what I did." Later that night, she stood alone in her kitchen. The kettle whistled gently, and the smell of herbs filled the air. Above the stove, hanging on a small hook, was her old dog tag. She had hung it there quietly after everything settled down. Not to remember the war, but to honor the woman who survived it. Tanned, everything after. Sometimes, in the still of night, she would step outside and look at the stars. No camera flashes, no news vans, just the sky and her land beneath it. She would listen to the wind rustling through the trees and feel the rhythm of her breath. Slow, steady, alive, the rifle stayed locked away now. Deep in the barn where it belonged, not forgotten, but no longer needed. She had become something more than a soldier, more than a survivor. She had become a symbol, not for violence, but for resilience. Not for fear, but for quiet strength. Neighbors brought her vegetables, students asked for stories. She gave them soil, seeds, and silence instead. She taught not with words, but with the way she moved. The way she watched, the way she waited. Because strength didn't always shout. Sometimes it just stood its ground on the first snowfall. She woke early and made tea outside. The farm was a sheet of white. Untouched and still, she stepped onto the porch. Wrapped in a shawl, the cold kissed her skin. But she smiled anyway. It was beautiful. And it was hers. On the gate, someone had left a note tied with twine. She opened it and read the words slowly, "Because of you. I believe in safety again. No name, just words." She folded the note and placed it beside the old one, the one the child had written months before. She didn't need signatures. She recognized truth when she saw it. That night, as the snow fell heavier, Lenora sat by the fireplace. The flames crackled softly, casting dancing light across the wooden floor. On the mantel sat a photo of her unit, a faded ribbon, and a tiny goat statue carved from cedar. Peace was not what she had expected in her final years, but it was what she had earned, not through bullets, not through war, but through watching, waiting, and refusing to bend. She had been the storm when needed. Now she was the calm that followed, and on that quiet farm, with snow falling outside and fire warming her bones, Lenora James, the farmer, the soldier, the legend, closed her eyes. And for the first time in a long time, she truly rested.